The sun beat down mercilessly over the dusty plains, casting long shadows across the small town that clung stubbornly to life on the edge of the frontier. The air was thick with the smell of horses, sweat, and gunpowder, and the creak of wagon wheels echoed along the cracked wooden street. People gathered, whispering in clusters, their eyes fixed on the wooden stage set up outside the sheriff's office. A woman stood there, her wrists bound, her hair tangled with dirt and dust, her dress torn from hardship and travel. She looked like she had seen 100 battles and lost every one of them. Her eyes, deep pools of exhaustion and fear, scanned the crowd without hope. And when the sheriff raised his hand to silence the murmurs, she whispered under her breath, "Please, just make it quick," the sheriff announced. Her fate without hesitation. She was to be sold, like cattle, for crimes she had not truly committed, but could never defend herself against in a town ruled by money and guns. The bidding started, voices rang out, but the offers were weak, filled more with cruelty than mercy. Then, a deep voice cut through the crowd. $1. Silence fell as every head turned toward the man who had spoken. He was a rancher, broad-shouldered, dust-covered, with a face that carried the scars of old fights and the weariness of a man who had buried more friends than he cared to remember. His black hat shadowed his eyes, but when the woman lifted her gaze toward him, she saw something different, not the hunger of a predator, but the fire of a man who carried a burden too heavy for most. The sheriff scoffed. $1? That's an insult. But the rancher didn't flinch. He stepped forward, dropped a silver coin into the dust, and repeated firmly, $1. The crowd muttered. Some jeered, but none challenged him, for they knew his name carried weight. He walked to the stage, cut the ropes himself, and without another word, lifted the woman down as if she were made of glass. Her body trembled, not just from weakness but from disbelief, because in that moment she didn't know if she had been saved or if she had simply been purchased for another kind of torment. They rode out of town in silence, the sound of the horses' hooves pounding against the earth, filling the void between them. She clutched the torn fabric of her dress close, bracing herself for whatever came next. When they reached his ranch, sprawling acres of sunburnt land surrounded by fences and cattle, he dismounted first and held out his hand to help her down. She hesitated, suspicion flashing in her eyes, but eventually she let him steady her. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracked and raw. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because no one deserves what they were planning to do to you." His words struck her like a blow, for they were filled with quiet conviction rather than desire. Still, fear gnawed at her. Men didn't buy women for kindness. Men didn't pay even a single coin unless they expected something in return. That night, he gave her a room in the ranch house, clean sheets, food laid out on the table, and a basin of water to wash the dust and despair from her skin. She ate cautiously, her hands shaking, her eyes never leaving him. He didn't touch her, didn't demand anything, only asked, "What's your name?" She told him in a whisper, and for the first time in years, she felt like a human being, not an object. Days passed, and the ranch's rhythm wrapped around her like a strange comfort. The cattle, the horses, the chores all carried out under the rancher's steady leadership. He worked hard, never complaining, his strength matched only by the silence that seemed to weigh on him, like an invisible chain. She began to wonder what haunted him, why a man like him lived alone on so much land, with only the wind and the animals for company. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, she asked him, "What did you mean when you said no one deserves what they were planning to do?" His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened, and he told her about his sister, taken years ago by men who saw women as property, sold and broken until she took her last breath in the desert. He hadn't been there to save her, and the guilt carved him hollow. "I couldn't save her," he said, his voice low, "but I could save you." Tears stung her eyes, for she finally understood the weight he carried. He hadn't paid $1 to own her, he had paid $1 to redeem himself. Yet, even as trust began to take root, danger loomed. The men who had expected to claim her for themselves weren't about to let her go without consequence. They came riding across the plains one night, torches blazing, guns strapped to their belts, their laughter cruel and jagged. She saw them first from her window and froze, her heart racing. The rancher was already saddling his horse, rifle in hand. "Stay inside," he ordered. But she stepped out, trembling yet defiant, because she couldn't bear to let him face them alone. The leader of the gang sneered. "You think you can take her for $1? She belongs to us." The rancher raised his rifle, his voice steady as stone. Between terror and awe at his unshakable resolve, the men laughed, but there was no humor in it. The night exploded into violent gunfire ripping through the dark, horses rearing, flames dancing against the wooden fences. She screamed his name as bullets whistled past, but the rancher fought like a man possessed, like a man who had nothing left to lose but his honor. When the dust settled, bodies lay sprawled across the dirt, and the surviving men rode off into the night, their courage broken, their greed defeated. The rancher stood bleeding, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths, his rifle still hot in his hands. She rushed to him, tears streaming, pressing her hands against his wound as if her touch alone could hold him together. "Why would you do this?" she cried, her voice shaking. He looked at her, and despite the pain, a faint smile touched his lips. "Because I'd rather die fighting for what's right than live with another ghost on my conscience." She held him through the night, refusing to let him slip into the shadows, whispering words she never thought she'd say. "You saved me. Now let me save you." And in the quiet dawn that followed, with blood dried and the air heavy with the cost of survival, she realized the truth. He hadn't bought her to own her. He had bought her to give her back her freedom, to give her a chance at life when the world had already buried her. As the screen fades at the end of this chapter, remember, every story of courage, sacrifice, and redemption deserves to be heard. If you want to hear what happens next, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next chapter of this unforgettable journey. The days that followed the bloody standoff were heavy with silence, the kind that seemed to linger even in the rustling of the wind and the creak of the old wooden beams of the ranch house. She moved through the rooms quietly, her every step guided by the gnawing fear that the rancher's wound would worsen, that the man who had risked everything to save her would slip away in the night without another word. But he clung to life stubbornly, as if sheer will alone could defy death, and she cared for him with a devotion she never imagined she could still possess. She changed his bandages, boiled water for his fevers, and sat by his bed whispering stories of the life she once dreamed of, a life she thought the world had stolen forever. And slowly, like the first fragile green shoots breaking through scorched earth, trust deepened into something neither dared name aloud. He, the rancher who had paid $1 for her life, began to smile again in small moments. When she scolded him for trying to lift hay bales before he had healed, when she burned the stew but stubbornly forced him to eat it anyway, when she laughed in the evenings and filled the lonely halls of his ranch with warmth he had thought lost forever. Yet, beneath that fragile peace, shadows stirred. The gang he had fought off was not destroyed. Their leader had slithered back into the desert with vengeance burning in his eyes, gathering more men, promising blood for blood. Word of it came on the wind, whispered by a rider who passed through town and told of outlaws mustering in the hills. The townsfolk shook their heads, muttering that no man could stand alone against such fury. And when the news reached her ears, her heart sank, for she knew that if the rancher faced them again, he might not return. She begged him to leave, to sell the ranch, to run far away where no one would find them. But he only shook his head, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "This land is all I have left of my family. If I run, I'll lose them all over again." His words pierced her, for she understood now his fight wasn't just about the ranch or even about her. It was about facing the ghosts that haunted him, proving to himself that he would never again stand by while the world devoured the innocent. The night came like a storm, sudden and merciless. The outlaws rode in with torches high, their howls shattering the silence of the plains. The sky burned orange as flames lit the fences, and the thunder of hooves shook the ground. She clutched her rifle in trembling hands, her back pressed to the wall. But the rancher turned to her, his voice calm though death was riding toward them. "No matter what happens tonight, remember you are free. No one owns you, not even me. You walk this earth as your own, and don't you ever forget that." Tears blurred her vision as he saddled his horse and rode into the night, his silhouette swallowed by fire and dust. Gunshots cracked across the fields. Men shouted, horses screamed, and the earth itself seemed to tremble beneath the weight of vengeance. She could not stay hidden. Her fear was great, but greater still was the thought of losing him, the man who had given her back her life. So she ran into the chaos, her bare feet pounding against the dirt, her voice screaming his name. She found him in the heart of the storm, fighting like a man possessed, his rifle empty, his revolver smoking, his fists striking with the fury of years of buried grief. But they were too many, surrounding him like wolves circling a wounded lion. She lifted her rifle, fired into the crowd, and for a moment the tide shifted. But then a shot rang out and the rancher fell to one knee, blood soaking his shirt. Her scream tore through the night as she ran to him, shielding him with her body, daring the outlaws to fire again. The leader of the gang stepped forward, his grin twisted with cruelty. $1, he sneered. That's all your life is worth. And now it ends. But the rancher, bleeding and broken, lifted his gaze and with the last of his strength, whispered words that struck the outlaw like a hammer. $1 bought her freedom, not her chains, and it's more than your soul will ever be worth. With a roar, he lunged, pulling the outlaw down with him, and the two men crashed into the flames. The struggle was brutal, primal, and when it ended, the outlaw lay still in the dirt, his cruelty extinguished forever. The remaining men, shaken by the fall of their leader, fled into the night, leaving behind only silence and smoke. She cradled the rancher in her arms, her tears mingling with the blood on his chest. "Don't leave me," she begged, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare leave me now." His eyes softened, his hand trembling as it brushed her cheek. "I did the unthinkable," he whispered, his voice faint, "not by paying $1, but by letting myself care again." She pressed her forehead to his, clinging to the warmth that was slipping away. "Then live," she pleaded. "Live and let me care for you too." For a long moment, she thought she had lost him. But then, against all odds, his chest rose with a ragged breath. Dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, and the ranch stood battered but unbroken. Together, they buried the dead, rebuilt the fences, and from the ashes of that night, they forged a life neither of them had thought possible. She was no longer the woman who whispered, "Please, just make it quick." She was reborn, fierce and free, walking beside a man who had traded his grief for hope, his loneliness for love. And as they stood together, watching the cattle graze on land that had been bought and defended, with blood and courage, she took his hand and held it tight, knowing that their story was not one of despair, but of survival, redemption, and the unthinkable power of a single choice. If you've been moved by this story of sacrifice, redemption, and unexpected love, make sure to subscribe to this channel so you never miss more powerful stories like this one. Your support helps us keep bringing you tales that touch the heart and stir the soul.